December 2011. I was part of a platoon that was stationed in Afghanistan in Helmand Province, and we were tasked on a clearance patrol, which was called an op-archer, to go and clear an area or spike activity in an area of Taliban activity.
Tell me about the incident early December.
So we were sent on the task. We pushed into a place called Kunjak, which was a known hotbed for Taliban activity. As we went through the village, we noticed the atmospherics changed drastically. No one was out. People left, went inside the buildings. So there was a kind of a combat indicator that something could happen at that point. We pushed successfully through Kunjak Central itself, and we'd been on task for about an hour in Kunjak itself, and the multiple commander, which was the platoon commander, decided that we would start to push off task because the air assets that we had above that would have given the precision strike only had a allotted amount of time to stay with us. As we started to push out of the village, we got to a large drainage ditch within farmers' fields where we got ambushed crossing this point. So as we come across the crossing point, I was probably second to third man in the patrol. First guy had gone across, second man was in the ditch. I was about to get into be able to assist and help people across. So it was that point there where we got opened up on from multiple firing points from the Taliban. I couldn't really assess how many there were at the time, but it was a huge weight of fire that had come down upon us on that exact point. It was almost that they planned for us to go that exact route. Impossible for them to know that, but we were where we were. So I kind of had 2 to 3 guys in one field, myself in the ditch, and then the remainder of the patrol were kind of on the belt buckles, trying to identify a firing point. We had to make the decision, or I had to make the decision to get across the ditch into the opposite field that we were going into. And as we got into there, we fanned out into an extended line, into a baseline, where I could more easily identify where the firing points may or may not be. The rate of fire had increased upon us. We still hadn't observed the enemy firing point. We were probably, it seemed like an age, to be honest with you, that we were there for, but it probably wasn't that long. 2 to 3 minutes of sustained fire on top of you is long enough for anyone. I kind of crawled back away from the baseline that we had in place to see if I could observe, any movement, any muzzle flash, any smoke from any of their weapon systems, and I was able to identify 2 firing points at that stage. I directed the fire from my multiple onto those firing points that was again increasing their rate of fire. At this stage, I think we'd started to be hit with kind of underslung grenades from some kind of underslung grenade launcher, whatever they were using, AK variant or something like that. I crawled back to the platoon commander to have a quick chat with him. Again, this is happening, very, very quickly, but in that moment, it seems like forever. And as I'd identified the positions, I made a plan to go and assault those positions. We'd been in theatre for a couple of months, and we'd been consistently in firefights and skirmishes with the Taliban, and nothing had ever lent itself to being so deliberate from them that they were staying to fight as opposed to withdrawing like their usual tactic was. We didn't at this point have any air assets on station. It had actually gone. Again, it was almost as if they knew we had no support. So there was, 12 of us, versus, their 2 to 3 firing points that were sort of bearing down on us. I told him my plan, that I planned to go on a right flank, back the way we'd come, to be able to fix their positions and assault and clear through them. it was almost like a kind of a Brecken style assault that you would do conventionally, that you were trained on the most ideal scenario. This is how you assault a position conventionally, not necessarily Afghan tactics, but the ground and what had happened or where they were firing from really lent it to that. The boss said, okay, let's go for it. At that point, I returned back to my point in the line, in the baseline, and then tried to give out a quick set of QBOs, quick battle orders to my multiple that was there. I called in 2 to 3 guys that were going to come with me because I would need 4 people inclusive of myself. One lad that I wanted to take with me was sapped. His energy was sapped from the patrol, from the contact. The fields that we were patrolling through were heavily irrigated at that point of the year. So we were walking around in mud that was up to our shins. So it was really energy sapping. So one of the guys had the moral courage, I would say, to turn around and say, look, maybe you should take someone else. So I picked the guys that we were going to go with, briefed them. We increased the rate of fire at this point, and I fired a rocket towards the enemy position, or one of the enemy positions that I saw. And we started to move. We had to cross the ditch that we'd initially come across, which was large to say the least. It was probably up to my shoulders, so probably about 5 foot deep, to get yourself in there with all your kit and drag yourself out of it and over to the other side. At this point there, kind of you felt a change in where the firepower was being aimed at, whilst they were targeting the guys that were in the field, which we were kind of fixed to a point because the ditch behind us, the cover behind us, was overgrown, and at that time of year everywhere was cultivated, so it just had a combat indicator that was an IED or something that wasn't great for us to be in there. So we were in an open field essentially. So the firepower kind of split between those in the field and us moving. We moved up around a flank where I observed another firing point, which began to engage us at this point. And I dropped 2 guys off as a point of fire, really, to cover the third point I'd identified, and to suppress that because it was further out. But with what we had, one of the guys could suppress that point. And the position I was going to assault, I had another guy there that could essentially fire me in for a longer period of time than the rest of the multiple. You imagine at this point, maybe 10 to 15 minutes in, maybe a little bit longer, but the adrenaline's really going. Even though it was December, sweating, and you're still trying to ensure that you're IDing these firing points, because we were conscious that there were civilians in the area, so we had to be very clear on what we were engaging. The one position was being suppressed. We were being fired into the other. I turned around to the guy that was coming with me, Rob. I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to assault that position. We're going to fix bayonets and we're going to cross that ground. I don't think he'd realised to that point what we were about to go and do. It was one of those things where I could see in his eyes, he was like, right, okay, well, I'm here, I'm with you. Let's go. So we fixed bayonets, which in this kind of fighting, which would potentially go into close quarter battle, it would be a standard procedure for a frontline infantry unit to carry out that tactic. We started to fire a manoeuvre across the open ground, which very quickly 2 people moving across open ground become a very good target for whoever's firing at us. And you could feel the rounds kind of whizzing past. It's a strange feeling. It's really difficult to describe, but you knew that you were being shot at. The crack and thump that was coming across your head, the dirt that was thudding, rounds were thudded into the ground around us. And obviously the fields were irrigated. So we were moving with all our kit, fire and manoeuvre. So one person static, firing at the position while the other person moved forward. And we were moving across this irrigated field towards there. All the while, the initial or the remainder of the patrol were having to cut off their fire and stop firing because we were manoeuvring out in front of them. So they kind of become redundant. So you are your own fire support at that stage. We closed in onto the position. We got closer and closer. The rate of fire from the Taliban intensified. We managed to put ourselves into a kind of little divot in the ground. There wasn't much cover at all, where I prepared to assault that position. Radio communications were kind of not really there. Something had happened to my radio throughout, as it would do, as you need it to, and we prepared to go into the position. I did halt the assault at that point. I remembered coming through the village earlier on, and I knew that there were children in that area. And again, standard practice for you to clear through a position would be to post a grenade and then follow through. I decided that wasn't an option I wanted to take at that stage. And I went into this kind of small alleyway. I just said, I'll go first and then you follow me. So I went into the alleyway, and as I was firing into the alleyway, the position had been kind of collapsed very, very quickly with the Taliban fighters on their toes. But it was at that stage there where an in-depth position had opened up on us. Again, they kind of manoeuvred themselves very well. The Taliban aren't silly. There are, kind of basic fighters, but if they've got a commander around them, which they did, they do use tactics on us. So they're trying to manoeuvre around us. We positioned ourselves back into some cover, or some loose cover, where I called in my initial fire support team, or the two guys I'd left behind, to close in back onto me, where we were in a position then to fix these other positions with the firepower that we had. There was four of us. One had a light machine gun. I had a guy with an underslung grenade launcher and two rifles. The point I assessed to be the most threat, I ordered the guy with the underslung grenade, Nick, to fire onto that position with a grenade. He initially missed, but he fired the second grenade at the position, and that position ceased firing on us. This time, the in-depth position that had opened up on us, you could see they collapsed into, again, started to engage us, and the four of us then started to suppress that, whilst the remainder of the patrol closed back in onto my location, where we could kind of fan ourselves out and then begin suppressing that while we would plan to go for the next assault. The boss closed in on me, the platoon commander. I gave him a quick back brief on what had happened, what was going on, and where the current enemy positions are. We did then start to, identify that there were markers. We were on a prominent track that led into the village at this stage, so we were one side and the fighters were, 1 to 200 metres the other side. There were markers out there, and it almost looked like it was a bit of a come on, where they wanted us to chase them down. We knew there was other units being pushed out to try and cut off their routes of escape. And it was at that stage where we held where we were, and the rate of fire from that position started to kind of die down, and they disappeared as they did at times. But there was too much ground sign for us to give chase anymore, because it would have been too much of a risk with two. There wasn't enough of us to proceed on. This had lasted about maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes of sustained fire, which is a long time to be in constant contact with the enemy. So we had to bear in mind of ammunition, what ammo state were we at? We kind of really had to take a second and pause before we made our next decision.
You'd been to Afghan multiple times in multiple firefights, explosions. You were a seasoned soldier, you were a professional. You were awarded the Military Cross for that incident.
Yeah.
But I want to fast forward as several years. How did you end up in a psychiatric unit?
Over the years, I had, and I'd not seen it in myself because it was kind of normal, where there were these behaviours of whether it was a big binge drinking or very short tempers, that kind of thing. And if you're in an all-male environment like the infantry is or was at the time, it kind of becomes normalised and you're kind of insulated with it. One day just before I was posted away from my unit to a new job, went out for a run, and I kind of missed maybe half hour, 45 minutes of my life. I just woke up or came to walking around a field, and I'd gone out for a run on my own, and that wasn't quite right, and that kind of didn't sit well with me. So I went and spoke to the mental health team or the doctors, who suggested I started to talk to someone. But I moved back to the UK from Germany, probably 2 weeks later. As I moved back to the UK, I kind of really quickly deteriorated within my own headspace. It was like I'd come out of my own comfort blanket, being around everybody I knew, everybody that I respected. My whole kind of support network was in the military. And it was almost like I had voices in my head, things talking to me, obscure sleep patterns. And I just couldn't work it out, and ended up going on holiday, a family holiday. And I remember sat by the pool on this family holiday with friends that we knew, another 3 or 4 families. And I didn't want to talk to them, be around them. I kind of insulated myself the other side of a pool. I not really said anything to anyone, and that was just how I was being. But in my head, I kept thinking, I'm not good for anyone, and that I shouldn't be around anybody, and that maybe it was the best that I wasn't around anyone. So I started to think, well, how could I kill myself here? But then the other side of me, this kind of angel devil shoulder kind of scenario, oh no, you shouldn't do that here because of your family's here, their families are here. What would they think? But that was the only thing that was in my head. It was what someone else's perception may be and their memories may be of it, not that it was a bad idea. We returned from the holiday and things didn't get any better. I was again isolating myself from everyone, drinking heavily, just being really off. And one day I just couldn't deal with it anymore and felt it was best that I wasn't around, and decided to go and find I'd been walking around locally on my own, and decided I was going to pick a tree to hang myself from. In that moment, you're clearly not thinking very clearly, and I wasn't equipped right to do that. And the next thing I really remember, I was sat on the beach in Hythe in Kent, just looking at the waves, and I don't know how long I'd been out for, but it was long enough that my wife had come looking for me. And Hythe's not a huge place, and I was walking down the main road, and on my way home I kind of snapped to, and she found me and took me home, and I had to engage with the doctor at that point. And they were extremely concerned for me, and I ended up being told that you need to, for your own safety, you need to go into a psychiatric unit.
What was the most shocking thing about the psychiatric unit?
For me personally, it was to see that it was a culture shock to me, because there are some really poorly people out there, And I was in this unit where there was people with varying different disorders, varying different ages, from young adults to pensioners. And I almost felt a bit of a fraud for being there, because I thought, well, hang on a second, there's some real issues here. And I felt really bad for being in there. And it was just playing in my mind that, what's wrong with me? Surely there's not much going on in comparison to others, but there was medication involved, and it was a safe area to be in. But really, it gave me a perspective to really sit at and look at where I wanted to go, and I did want to get better, but that was kind of the stepping stone and the culture shock I probably needed to realise that I did have a bit of an issue. There was a reason why I was there.
You told me about a little girl in there, a young girl. Yeah,
there's the horrible thing for me is that there was a young girl. She must have been, she was pre-16. She must have been 15. She was an adult, and she was in a care home with multiple kids in there, and she would all the time want to kill herself every single day, whether it was with a ligature, whether she would headbutt the corner of a wall because she just didn't want to be alive. Now, this was an adult ward, and when I asked, how come this girl's in here, there's no room on wards for children. The children's wards were full. So she had to come into an adult environment where there were some poorly people and some things that maybe she shouldn't see. But actually she was really unwell. And it was a massive shock to me to see, I've got children, how someone so young could want to end their life so early.
You went through several years of therapy, and EMDR therapy is what's working for you, or seems to be working for you. What does it take to go through therapy?
First, the realisation that you've got an issue. You can't go through a therapy process or a rehabilitation process for any injury, whether it's a mental or physical injury, without first accepting that there's an issue. Because without that initial acceptance that there's a problem, you're not going to accept what's on offer to help you. So for me, it was that initial acceptance, and then really just trying to work out what worked for me as a person outside of the therapy, because the therapy in itself is with a trained professional, and they take the lead on what you're doing within that session. But outside of that, you've got to take the lead on your own life. And, they call it the window of tolerance, where everyone has a window of tolerance, and you either, you can get a low window of tolerance where you're outside of it and you feel in low mood, or you can be outside of your window of tolerance in a different aspect where you could be aggressive or overexcited, too much energy. So you have to stay within your window of tolerance, and it's finding ways to keep yourself in there is the hardest thing that I've found, because the therapy is led by a professional.
Has anything manifested because of the therapy? Any memories that you may have blocked out that have come to the surface? And if they have, is that tough? Is it hard to go through therapy?
Yeah, I mean, essentially you're trying to draw kind of a line between 2 points. And for me, some of the memories I have, which I thought were complete memories, aren't actually complete memories whatsoever. I had a memory where I was injured in an IED blast, and I thought I was injured, and then there was a fire from the vehicle which engulfed one of my friends, and I thought after that I was carried back to the hospital, and that was kind of all that it was. But it wasn't quite as simple as that. I didn't really remember the other casualties on the helicopter, the MERT helicopter that picked me up. I didn't remember parts of the hospital. And when we've unlocked the trauma itself and we begin to talk about it, and my memories are starting to link up between each other, it started to unearth things that I'd forgotten or that were blocked out because I found them distressing. So dealing with that is very difficult, because not only have you spent a couple of hours that week talking about a situation that you thought or is unpleasant and is trauma, you've got further trauma in your head that's unlocked whilst you're trying to sleep. So it's so difficult when those further traumas are unlocked, because you're almost at a disbelief. I was at times that, why didn't I remember that?
Do you think you're a better person now because of the trauma you faced?
100%. I wasn't a better person. I became a worse person over time. And that was kind of unnoticed or not recognised, probably. Not unnoticed. I think it was noticed, but I think it was just not recognising it. I think they're two different things. I think it's easy to not see something going on with someone at times. So for me, I became worse before I got better. You know, a lot worse. You know, the psychiatric ward was a very low point, but in terms of my general mood and sleeping pattern, that became a lot worse before it got better. You know, and I still have therapy fortnightly now, trying to process these memories, and that will throw me off. You know, my sleeping pattern will change, my mood will change, but I know about these now, so I know what I can do. My family know these kind of, not warning signs, because I'm not going to flip out or anything like that, but they understand that I find it difficult to sleep, or I do become a bit more irritable.
What is your worst memory?
My worst memory, one I've alluded to already, was the IED blast. That one just consistently bothers me. It involved a close friend of mine. You know, it was back in 2008, and the vehicle struck an IED. I was at the front of it. I was wounded, not severely, just shrapnel wounds. But in the blast, the vehicle had set on fire, or the engine had set on fire, which kind of engulfed my friend a bit. That for me is something that always sticks with me. Whilst he came out relatively unscathed, which I'm really happy about, it just is always in my head consistently. It's just something I can't shake. It's something I have nightmares about regularly, not as much as I used to, but I still have regular nightmares of the same situation. So that in itself bothers me quite a bit.